Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This vegan show, we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season finale of Evil. A great season finale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have David being questioned. Obviously, all the stuff he has to go through to becoming a priest, answering these questions. He's basically got to take a test. And I love that the first, person he has to be questioned by is Renee. I'm like, oh, this is awkward. Last time we saw each other, it's like, well, to be fair though, I was about to say it's not what happened between them. It was like, oh, that someone had caught video of them doing what they did, and because he thought it was her and she thought it was him, but it was like, oh, there was someone else that played screwing with them. So I want to say that's the last time she popped up last season, but also she's bringing up do you know of basically any stuff that the church has done bad? And he's like, no, and any sexual stuff, and he's just kind of pausing, and she's like, let me clarify that, and it's like, he's like, I would have to say no. And obviously she's asking are you doing this for my sister, or are you doing this for you? And she's like, both. And he's like, and she's like, I want you, this is something that's really hard. Make sure if you're doing it only for yourself. So, and he's like, I'll miss you and I'll miss you. And obviously Ben and Kristen are busting his chops because it's like, hey, Father Acosta. And he's like, hey, my children. But this episode is for cannibalism because they meet Mitch, who has started, craving raw meat. He's just the urge comes to him, but it's not just that. It doesn't stop there. He works in he's going to school and stuff like that in an apartment where he'd be around cadavers and stuff like that. So he started he's like, my body had a certain reaction. I started salivating. And it's like, okay, so Ben's obviously checking to see if there's something more here. There's some toxicity. That's his kind of thing to make sure all right, first and foremost, let's see if there's some toxicity to this. Because even Mitch, zip ties himself, and then ultimately they're even asking is his urges worse at night? He's like, no, they're worse after he comes back from the thing. So they go to because he has a recurring nightmare where he's in the old facility and he's running from something dark and he can't see, and he's every time he's dreaming about it, it's getting closer and closer. And then I guess that thing is a giant metaphor for both a probably literal and metaphorical representation of him getting consumed by the dark. I guess the thing that's coming after him is one of the 60 demon houses. We'll kind of get to that, but as they go to the place, it's David comes, checks it out. I think it was him and Ben, but it says the 3 a.m. haunt. So it's right, we got to come back here to find out what's what. I even love that it's him and Kristen are going, just a small party, just the three of us, kind of your priest bachelor party essentially. But when he gets there, it's not just them, it's everybody. It's Kurt, it's the people from the church, it's Cheryl, it's Kristen's kids. I love it. And I love that, as everyone's celebrating and, everyone's so proud of David, Father Acosta and everything. But what was really interesting, though, is, Kurt's okay, so I got to talk to you about something. Something happened to the last exorcism. And it's I want to talk to you because you won't laugh at me. And it's she's and even the sister's why would I not laugh at you? It's because you believe in demons and stuff like that. And so he brings it up to her, which for her, she immediately goes you need to be baptized because basically you want a scientific explanation for it. You have basically dedicated your entire life to the ethereal and not the empirical. And it's you want a scientific explanation for everything. You even tried to scientifically justify what you saw, but what you saw was, in fact, a demon. You need to get baptized. You need to be good with God type of situation. Just kind of because I just thought that was so fascinating because I thought he probably wasn't expecting that to necessarily be the response. He was probably hoping she'd probably literally kind of go down the more metaphorical demon route. It's no, that was literally a demon you saw. He should confide in other people about it because if he described what he saw, other people would know because Ben's been seeing, he hasn't seen it for a while because I think that is done, but he was seeing that succubus that looks a lot like George, but then also Kristen has been seeing George, and it's the argument could be did she ever describe him in her sessions? Because if so, it's the justification becomes there's a psychological thing of right, you were in a moment where you were scared and your fears manifested as this, and you took on something that was scary, and it's in your general zeitgeist because of your constant sessions with Kristen and stuff. Like there would be a justification for it. So I love Ben hanging out with the kids. I love it. It's like the youngest one's like, oh, let's go to the balcony. He's like, no, you'll kill yourself. She's like, he's like, fine, go ahead, kill yourself. And she's just like, and she like comes back over there with them. It's like, oh, you should care more. He's like, I'm a mean person. Like, why haven't y'all gotten that already? So, and he's kind of scaring them with like ghost stuff. It's like, oh yeah, that's for tracking ghosts and stuff like that. Obviously, David's been kind of having his doubts because Renee brought it up during the questions of like, oh yeah, you went to meetings for sex addiction. Is that an issue now? And it's like, no. But after that conversation, he started thinking about some of like, I think his more promiscuous times. And, cause at first I was like, was that like vision at first with Renee's sister? I mean, it could have been but it would seem like there was someone else. I'm like, yo, David got down like that, like threesomes and stuff like that. Your boy was probably part of orgies and stuff like that for all we know. It's like, oh, his, sex capades aren't something we really hear about. I'm sure like he doesn't want to flaunt and talk about that, especially trying to become a priest. So that's a whole thing in itself. I do like that they ultimately did go to like the 3 a.m. haunt after the party and stuff like that. And lo and behold, who do they end up like? They're like, okay, like what is all this? Looking into it, and it's like, oh, is this blood? But it's like, no, it's wine. It's a prank. And it turns out the haunt involves like students like sleeping in like those little like cubby things or whatever. And it's like, oh, like there's 3 more down here if you want to join us. Like, first and foremost, why would they want to join you? I guess it's like, just assuming they're fellow college students as well. But just I love Kristen like, you just scared the living shit out of us. You scared out of us too. Oh, before you leave, could you like push us close too? But David went off on his own, and like he ends up finding like a demon chewing on a cadaver, and it starts chasing him. He's lucky he's not in a wide open space that it with small corridors, because the thing's got wings, but it can't really fly like it wants to because it's smacking into things. So I'm like, which is so interesting because in like a horror sense, it always seems like the creature always has the advantage of you because it's always like if it's got flight. But it's like, yeah, he's inside of a building. It doesn't. Luckily, it worked out for him because like it couldn't fly after him. But it was kind of a panicking moment of just like. Because this is the first time, like, David's had visions before, like, the most demonic thing. Well, he's seen the angel Michael, or at least what proclaimed to be the angel Michael. And probably other than that, the most, like, demonic thing he's actually seen was, like, the goat dude that Leland killed a couple episodes ago. Like, that's about it. So this is the most visceral one he had. And it's like, what was that? I don't even know. And so he goes to talk to the sister about it. And she talks about, this is, the closer you get to God, it's not just like the good that becomes more real, so does the evil, because it's like your visions have always been real, but now it's just to the point that closer you become to God, the more they can actually hurt you. And then she starts showing off one, and it's like, oh, this is from a tale, which I'm like, well, we know Lexus start presenting a tale recently, then I'm like, is there some correlation there? Maybe not. But I thought that was so fascinating, because then David's like, wait, no, like, I wanted a normal life. She's like, normal life is crazy. When you actually break it down, like, the way the world works, and just normalcy in itself, it's like, yeah, it's crazy, but come on, this is an extra layer of crazy, because I think that's the interesting thing that it shook David. It's like, you're all about this, you're all about God, and it's just like, you're about your visions and everything, and now there's a situation of like, no, they're like extra real now, because they've always been real, but now it's like to the point they can actually hurt you. Like, you've crossed over to that in-between lane now that you've gotten so close to God, becoming a priest, because like, she's like, there's 1 in like a million people that have a power like you, and it turns out she's like him. And later on that night, the creature comes to visit her. So it is a thing of, you can't be like, oh, it's just in David's. It's like, no, this ain't just some vision. This is some real demonic stuff. That's the thing that this show, and other people have talked about it too, and I've talked about it, just like the show making you think, you never know what's real and what isn't. And it definitely seemed like there's some demonic stuff behind it, but once again, it's about like people like Kristen and Kurt trying to justify it. Even Ben justifying it by being like, oh, these are just like crazy people who like megalomaniacs who've taken demonic effigies and tried to adapt them to themselves, like, because they're, so just like that Satan church a couple episodes ago. That wasn't even last episode, that was the episode before last, I believe. Whatever the case may be. So it's that type. It's a fascinating dichotomy that this show's always had, but this is just one of those instances like, no, we're definitely, like, there's always been stuff that's popped up, like the freaking Jen. It's like, we saw it visit Leland, so it's not like, oh, that's just in Kristen's head. It's like, no, it's real. A lot of the stuff has been real. Obviously, like, for a while, you're thinking, well, George is like, no, like, George was real. It's just, there's a real world explanation. Maybe it took on that form just to make you unsure or not. I mean, what about the succubus that, Ben saw? Like, he never got rid of it by the same means that Kristen did. Plus, now George is visiting Kurt, so does that mean that the succubus? Because we never actually got her name, did we? Not unless it's something like, oh, he's George and she's like Georgia or Georgina or something like that. You never know. I think Georgia would probably be the more appropriate. I don't know. I mean, Georgina's a real name, isn't it? I know Georgia is. Regardless, I'm going on a whole tangent. It just got me thinking about people like naming themselves like, you know, like after states and stuff like that. I mean, there's like, I'm sure there's Carolinas. I say that because I'm a North Carolinian, in case anyone didn't know that. There are Dakotas. There's Virginias. I don't know if there's any Californians. You never know. There might be New Yorks. I know people use it as a stage name. Regardless, I'm going on a whole tangent. That crossed my mind. I do apologize, like how scatterbrained, how very like all over the place I can get in these. But essentially, putting that all aside, they ultimately do want to do an exorcism for Mitch, but they just need to get his permission. So you have Kristen sitting down with him, and lo and behold, who shows his ugly mug? Leland. And so it's like, obviously Kristen's not about this, so they both call him on Senior. Well, she calls David, and then Leland calls him on Senior about it. And I love that he's such a lying dickwad that he's like, ow, what's going on? Kristen, she took out of her show, hit me. Ow, she took it, and she's like, you lying bastard. And he's like, oh, like, can we just get along and stuff like that? And it's like, all right. She's like, screw you. And I love that after the phone hung up, she was just like, and she's smiling and laughing. I'm like, I love this, because the last time she was smiling and laughing like this in front of Leland, she tore him a new asshole. I love it. She belittled him and made him feel small and everything last season. I was like, ooh, get him, Kristen. It was almost that moment again. I was like, oh, she about to tear you a new asshole? She didn't verbally like she did last time. This time she did it physically, which she's like, I was like, oh, well, you said that she hit you with the shoe, so she's going to make it happen. And he's like, oh, you need to get some help. And she's like, this is helping Leland. She's like, oh, like, do you think it's gonna make me feel better? So she's like whacking him in the head with the shoe and kind of walks off. I was like, that's so badass, dude. I love it. But especially like later on, David's going through his like the final like ceremonies and stuff like that of becoming a priest. And obviously, partway, like, doing what he's supposed to be laying down, he's thinking about some sexcapades, and then he kind of, like, you know, he already had that hard time of, like, you know, in the monastery, just being like, fuck, you know, couldn't clear his mind and stuff like that, and it kind of comes back to haunt. I mean, I don't know if it's just because Renee, just everything between him and Renee, and just a reminder, its connection to Julie, and his past, which kind of involved all of that, like, I don't know. And now that, you know, it's like, once again, like, because Kristen had asked him earlier, like, is it scarier and that the countdown, you know, just like, yeah, it's like, at that point, it was like 3 days away and stuff like that. But then it turns out Leland passes a note to Lexi. I thought he was going to pass it to her just to pass it to Kristen. Turns out not. It's like, it was for Lexus specifically. He's like, whoa, what are you doing? It's like, and the note says Daffodil. You're like, wait, what? And so it's like, okay, so we know, like, that's the thing between Edward and Cheryl, but I'm like, maybe that's like a code word between all of them. And so it's like, we know what that meant for Cheryl, so what does that mean for Lexus? So maybe everything she did was actually part of, like, the whole shtick. Like, she was, like, she's like, why she waited till now to finally tell her mom, because it's like, yeah, like, Leland came to me all the time at school. It's like, has he actually been visiting her? Like, we don't know, like, how much of this is true, because, I mean, she's been visited before, because, like, the goat dude came and visited her. She's been going through all the changes she's been going through recently, so it's like, you don't know what to make of it, like, heads or tails of it all. But it's like, yeah, he's been visiting me, and she's like, yeah, you're going to, like, because she didn't want to tell, like, Lexus didn't want to tell her mom, because it's like, yeah, you're going to be really, really mad if I tell you. And it's like, okay. And now Kristen's in that position, like, am I going to have to do it again? And I like that they paralleled that, because it's like, she was literally in the same situation in the season 1 finale of like, oh, I'm going to kill, you know, so now it's a situation of like, is she going to do it again? And she goes for like her climbing axe, and then she puts it back. I was like, okay, you're not going to do it. Then she's tempted. She grabs it and walks out the door. It's like, oh, we're about to have a repeat of this. I was like, wow. And then when someone comes at Leland's door, I was like, oh boy, this is about to get bad. I'm actually skipping over it too. Lexus has the book that we've been seeing the entire time, which I love the intro to this. Like, the person's trying to close the book, but then like the pop out cannibal ends up biting the person's finger off. But Lexus is reading through the book. So I was like, is that all the openings to this supposed to be metaphor? Or is it supposed to be like, oh, Leland's the one doing it, but now he's passed it off to her? Not saying that's... I don't know. I don't know how literal that intro is now. It begs the question, like, how literal it is. But now it has the context of Lexus is reading it, seeing the word daffodil. Once again, I think she has certain actions she's have to take, and telling Kristen the truth was what her first daffodil, and like, oh, you hear daffodil again, or see it, or read it, you have to like, I don't know, or maybe it's just like some subconscious plant they have in her brain, I don't know, because like her circumstances are like some demonic thing, so maybe like that's how you activate the next generation of evil, you use the word daffodil. You know, maybe, who knows how far these seeds have been planted and in what regards. So I'm curious about that. But aside from that, like, you have, because Leland was trying to talk to Mitch about the fact that I'm like, oh, cannibalism's not that. I mean, look at Christianity. I mean, it's like, oh, you feed on the body of Christ and drink his blood. It's like, yeah, it's not cannibalism if it's a dead body. It's only cannibalism if it's a living person. He's like, wait, what? Are you serious? It's like, yeah, like you're trying to, because with the cannibalism angle to this, and like hearing what she heard from the demon that night, because that was in her dream, part of her vision, but still, that thing was licking on her and she was able to stab it with a cross. But hearing David bring up cannibalism, it fulfilled everything for her. These are the 60 demon houses, and that basically they're looking for their successors. But before the current master dies, he has to find a successor to replace him. The successor takes over the house by eating the previous person. So now you see, like, Mitch was set up for this. Like, he's supposed to be the new person. That's why I'm so curious about that creature above, like, that body. Like, why was that? Because Mitch kept being like, oh yeah, the body's like calling to me, but that was after David had already run into said body when like that demon was chewing on it. So like, why is it feasting on it? Like, is that itself the demon leaving the body, and that the moment like, oh, it's chewing on its former body, and now that the moment Mitch devours like flesh, which he does at the end of the episode, that said that demon is the one from the demonic house. That respective demonic house. That's what I'm thinking. I could be 100% wrong. Maybe that demon's unconnected, but that's because I was like, why are you chewing on that very specific body? Like, what are you doing? Like, you're the thing that's been chasing them the entire time. You have to be the demon from that demon house that's hopping from body to body. And so, like, this was your previous body you're now snacking on. Because I thought it was like a straight up cocoon when it got first revealed. I was like, oh, how very, like, once again, Jeepers Creepers-esque. But then I thought it was like a cocoon or something. And I thought, like, when we saw the body being snacked on, I thought it was going to be Mitch there, but then like it unveils itself to be a demon. I was like, oh shit. It kind of reminded me of something. It's a weird reference to me. It kind of reminds me of very similar creatures like that, except a little bonier from the video game Heart of Darkness. The shadowy like creatures, the ones that can fly and stuff like that. In that game, they reminded me of that. It reminded me of that aesthetic. But yeah, everyone's there. Leland, other people, as well as Cheryl. Now, this answers something someone had actually brought up earlier in the season that because I brought it up. Everything with Cheryl last season, I thought she was being corrupted. I didn't take her circumstances as her being possessed. But then they were like, no, Cheryl's always been possessed. I didn't correlate that. But now it's like, no, it seems like it might be the case, whether she's just kind of adjacent to it or not. It still seems like she's like, because at first I was like, but she hasn't eaten like a body, so she's not the successor to like one of the demon houses. But then I was like, well, all that stuff that she was getting injected into her, was that the cannibalism over time? Like, was that their way to kind of get her to consume it so she actually is the next one? I wonder, do those Eddie dolls like connect to that in some shape or form? But she did that whole thing at the end, so like maybe she's breaking that whole, like, she's like father, son, but it was like also to the Eddie dolls, so like that's why I'm like, it probably won't be till next season that I get a clearer explanation of like what that all means, because once again, it's like she was saying all that, praying, and then like that statue of Jesus is just kind of above her looking down, like praying down to her, but then also you have like, why she, once again, she specifically did it to the Eddie dolls, and it's like, because it seemed like that was unrelated to, because she was doing that before the Leland, like Leland came back into her life again, but maybe there is some correlation there. I don't know. I'm always going to look towards creepy dolls like that in a very demonic manner. Kind of like, you're almost like, nothing good comes from like creepy dolls like that. So tangents like that aside, I think it's, I don't know. Like, she might not be as fully gone or whatever, because the fact is that she told Leland, it's like, oh, you're going to keep your... He's like, oh, I promise. He's like, no, your word doesn't mean anything. I got something more real. You threaten go near my grandchildren again, I'll cut off your dick. And she made that clear. And so she was just sitting back and letting Mitch eat Home Dude's, like, the top of Home Dude's, like, head where the symbol was. So he dives in, so he's become the new successor. But, like, everyone else there has to be successors to the demon houses. Once again, from an outside perspective, it seems like, oh, it's just something psychological. I also didn't talk about the fact that Kurt's going on a break for like 2 months. It's like, yeah, he's got to figure out himself out and stuff like that. I'm like, is it in correlation with what the sister said to him? Plus, it's like what I saw, so he figures he's not in the best position. Which Kristen's like, whoa, wait, you're going to... It's like, he's like, oh, I can refer you to somebody. But it's like, yeah, the core, but he's like, you're dealing with like killing LaRoe. You need to kind of deal with it. She's like, oh, I'm past it. He's like, no, you're not. Because it was even interesting because... I'm bouncing all over the place. I'm not concise with this like I should be, but like Lexus referring like, oh, what's that? You smell like a dead cat. At first I was like, when she was like smelling her being different, I was like, oh, because this is post you kind of clearing things up. You did have like technically an exorcism and stuff like that. Or at least you were affected by an exorcism that was nearby and everything. So I thought that's what Lexus was smelling that was different. And she was saying like, you smell like not like a dead cat, but a dead body. But then it turns out like no one else could smell the formaldehyde. So it's like, what's up with that? Maybe that's supposed to infer that like Lexus, that's so interesting. Because if Lexus, well, because I'm about to say if Lexus was the successor to a house, like wouldn't that mean Kristen technically was as well? But maybe like they've chose like it doesn't. I'm being stupid because I'm thinking like it's a bloodline thing. Like, oh, your children. It's like, no, your successor is whoever you choose it to be. So I'm assuming Lexus might be either Leland's successor or someone else's successor. Well, because we already know, because I'm so stupid, because we already know that Edward chose Cheryl as his successor, so she might have eaten his grandfather's, and it's like, no. Once again, maybe that has something to do with, once again, the fluid she's been taking in and stuff like that, so maybe that's what that's been the entire time. I don't know, like, my mind's going in a million different directions with that, but it's just interesting that Lexus could smell that just like that formaldehyde smell was getting to it. She's not salivating yet, but I'm like, maybe she just hasn't reached that point yet, but eventually she will. Like, this is the stepping stones to like, right, she's ready to be someone's successor, maybe Leland's. Not unless Leland's setting up like Kristen or David. Like, maybe you need David to go super far off the edge so that he can become like maybe it's like one of the kind of like Supernatural, like breaking one of the seals to release Lucifer from his cage. It was like, you know, a good man had to torture a soul or something like that. You know, different seals had to be broken over the course of season 4, but it was all planned out even like years in advance. It was all set in you know, so I'm wondering, I mean, Evil's been planning its situation, like, you know, I mean, in the grand context of this series, I mean, like, Evil in itself within the confines of the story has been probably planning this for millennia, so it's like, yeah, everything's just going according to plan, we have to maneuver and adapt to modern society, but it's like, yeah, we're moving things along like we need to, so, I don't know, like I said, I'm just kind of, like, going buck wild, throwing those theories out there. But I am curious, like, is Kristen going to get a new therapist in the meantime? Is that person going to be part of the 60? Will Kurt be back? Like, is it just all that, you know, like, his recent circumstances with the exorcism, like, what really drove him? His wife made the suggestion for him to take some time off, so we'll see what kind of effect that had. I mean, well, we kind of saw in the end what kind of effect it had, because Kristen didn't have anyone to go to when the time came of, like, oh, she went to kill Leland. What surprised me, though, is she came to David, and she's like, I was going to kill Leland. He's like, no, you weren't. She's like, yes, I was, and brought over, she has the axe in her hand, because I thought she was, like, the moment Leland opened the door, I liked that they faint you out by, you know, cutting away, and it's like, oh, no, it's Mitch. It's not Kristen, because you almost halfway expect Kristen to go boom, right to the head, to the dome. But nevertheless, she went to David and confessed to him. about all that she's done. Like, you know, she tried to be a good mother. She tried to be a good, you know, wife. And it's like, I killed LaRoe. I killed him. I got away with it. Like, the cops know they were my friends, and they let me go. So that's been chipping away at her, too. Like, that's going to add guilt to your consciousness of not only did you do it, you also got away with it, you know, just because you have cop friends who are going to back your playiness, you know, so I'm sure that's going to rear its ugly head again if, like, with them, like, Myra and them, like, that's probably going to come back in some shape or form. But, David, like, takes her confession, as, you know, was saying beforehand that God will, because I think also for Kristen, she didn't want David to ever look at her differently. So, you know, and just, like, David's holding her, and it's like, it's okay, like, you know, and then he's like, look at me, and she's like, no, like, I don't want you to see my face, and he's like, it's going to be okay, and they look at each other, and I'm like, don't do it, I want you to do it, but don't do it. I really, really want you two to get together, but it's like, yeah, we're things you and Andy stand, and you're making, you know, so I was like, but now it's like, now something is happening between you and David. You've both wanted this for a while, and you're both in a position where, like, she's vulnerable, you're vulnerable, and you start making out, and you're like, oh boy. Because Leland wanted her to, like, convince David to not become a priest, but I think the whole point was, like, of course, like, they probably wanted him to become a priest so that Kristen, like I said, that's why I'm, like, wondering if, like, this was all set up so Lexus would tell her the truth, and she feel like she didn't want to go down that route again, so she try and go to David and confess, and then she'd end up corrupting him, kind of almost going down this, like, probably it's worse than him not becoming a priest as him becoming a priest, and, like, you know, for one, it's like, are they actually doing anything? We don't know. It cuts away from them just kissing, but maybe, like, when we pick up in season 3, all they're going to be doing is kissing. So, you know, but it's like, oh, that's not going to be good on any front, because if something happens, it's like, he's supposed to be celibate, but also for her, it's like, right, she's trying to repair things with Andy, he's going to close down the business, and he's coming, like, that's a whole other can of worms. I'm like, once again, I like the thought of them together. It's just, it's a complicated thing because of her marriage and everything, and now his marriage to God, essentially. So, where this all takes us, his visions and everything, how the sister's going to feel about all of this, you know. I mean, is David going to open up to her about it? Like, we're probably going to, like, when we pick up a season 3, it's most likely going to be a situation of, like, hey, we didn't, well, what happened between us, we'll probably never get, like, a clear, like, oh, did it go the way? And then you'll probably get, like, flashes of, like, them doing their thing, and it's like, oh, they did, and it's just like, woo. Because Kristen does seem like she has kind of, like, does seem like she was better in that moment, but also because it was David, like, would it have been better if it was a different priest? But maybe it needed to be David to, like, for her circumstances. I mean, what does this mean going forward? Is she going to start believing more in God? She's already, I feel like, tiptoeing in certain directions in that regard, but also, like, I don't know. I'm so curious to see where this goes. There's even the big thing. We still haven't even resolved the whole Vanessa and her twin sister thing. We left that wide open for season 3 to be like, where the hell is that going to go? You know, so I'm just so fascinated to see where all of this goes next season. Then there's also, right, Leland is officially still working at the church, so he's going to be there undermining all their cases, especially because the Monsignor letting him kind of run rampant. So it's like, yeah, he's there to be the one to kind of keep them in check. So there's probably going to be a lot of cases going forward in the 3rd season. This was his first one that he really kind of latched onto, especially because Cheryl at the party was like, oh, Kristen and Leland have their issues, but when they work together long enough, you know, but obviously that's her playing insider, but it's like, that's definitely going to be an undermining issue going forward into, like, season 3, especially if something happens between Christian and David. Like, he's probably going to sniff that out and kind of rub it in your faces type of thing. I don't know. I'm also curious, like, there was also that Satan church, like, yeah, they were basically talking about, like, oh, like, the devil was going to come after them or whatever. It's like, well, Ben already kind of got it, but maybe there's going to be future, like, attacks or whatever. And David got attacked, but maybe that's just this. So maybe the real attacks don't come until next season. Like, either they're going to pop back up specifically in episodes, or at least something's going to be tied to them coming after our team. So a lot of things to keep in mind going into season 3. I am so excited to ultimately see where all of it ends up taking us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.